Greetings, traveler. Recently, a user called Schrodinger's Katze6192 and also Deebinator asked a question about what to do in the case when your game is releasing at the same time as a huge game release, such as GTA 6. So this was in the comments in response to the video I had a few days ago about what to do when you're releasing your game and you're worried about other games in the market, other games releasing at the same time. What can you do to make sure that your game is successful regardless? So their concern is that, well, if you're releasing at the same time as such a huge game as GTA 6 or any other big game for that matter, there's nothing you can do and everybody will buy that game and they will not buy yours. This is a very valid concern. And today, what I want to talk about is how to think about the situation, how to analyze it and prepare for it as best as possible, and a few ways you can win in this situation, even if you're competing against the giants. My name is Xanthos. I've been working in the games industry for over 13 years now. And I remember back when I was working in electronic arts, a huge point of conversation, both outside and inside the company, was the coinciding release of Titanfall 2 and Battlefield 1. Essentially, people thought that it was a bad idea to release them at the same time because we were cannibalizing our audience and people could not buy both games and everybody would want to buy both games and so on. So I'm very familiar with this situation, both as a consumer and as a developer. And there's no point saying, whether that coinciding release was a good idea or a bad idea, or if one game did well and the other didn't because of the coinciding release, because there's far too many variables, as I've mentioned before, in this situation to clearly say what was wrong or what could have been done different. And even if we could find the correct path of action, I mean, it's all in the past now, so we couldn't do anything. So when we're thinking about releasing our game, and we know there's going to be other big game releases out there, what can we do? How can we manage the situation to make sure that our game releases successfully, it finds its right audience, and it does well regardless of everything else around it? First of all, let's address the elephant in the room of, let's say, for example, two fighters step into the ring. And one of them is way stronger, way faster, way more experienced, has greater strategy, better tactics, has fought more matches, knows the arena better. Basically, in every single measurable way, one fighter is better than the other, head and shoulders. In that situation, the better fighter is expected to win. If the weaker fighter won, that would be a huge surprise. It would be unforeseen, and it would be described as a huge stroke of luck. But in any other case, luck barred aside, the stronger fighter is expected to win. This is common sense. This is what every person knows instinctively for life. And nobody would be surprised if the stronger fighter won. So in the case of games, let's say two games come out at the same time, and one has way more budget, way more people working on it, they have worked on it for longer, it has better graphics, it has a better gameplay loop. You can see where this is going. If one game is just clearly better than the other, you would expect that game to be more desirable than the game that doesn't have all these things. If you go to buy a car, and for the same budget, one car has just better top speed, better safety, better whatever you're looking for, you're gonna decide to buy the one that has more of the thing you care about. So games are no different in this respect. So in that sense, if, let's say, your game was releasing at the same time as GTA 6, it would be expected and normal that most people would get GTA 6. Not because it's a big brand, not because it's a famous game, not because it has a longer history behind it, but simply because it has way, way more things going for it than a game released by a smaller developer. And because GTA 6 is going to be such a huge production, even big players in the market might not produce something that's good enough to compete with it. So this is very important because you need to pick your battles very carefully, traveler. You wouldn't step into the ring against a dinosaur or a raging bull or anything like that because you knew there would be no chance for you to win. So knowing where to fight and how is very, very important. Now, that being said, that doesn't mean that you can never fight, even against big releases like that. And since we're talking about racing or fighting in the ring and so on, there have been historical examples where the weaker fighter wins. So how can someone win in the case of games releasing together with other bigger games, possibly as big as GTA 6? Well, since this is a competition, you need to think about this in a way of what advantages one has against the competition. So let's say there's a very, very, very good game out there. It's very likely going to be very expensive. So if GTA 6 comes out, let's say at a $100 price mark, perhaps it's worth it, perhaps it's not. People will decide that. But whatever price it's going to be priced at is going to be fixed. And there's nothing we can do to change it. So if, let's say, it's $100, then there's many people who might not be able to afford that or who don't want to pay that much because they think it's just a video game. It's not that important. I would rather use that money for something else. So by definition, there's a big part of the audience that price is going to keep out of the possible people buying the game. So if the game you, traveler, release at a lower price mark, so $60, $50, 20, 10, 1, already you have a competitive advantage against that game. Not because we're comparing price for dollar per, I don't know, what would you measure this? Unit per fun? It's weird. But anyway, it's not a comparison like that. It's simply because many people wouldn't be able to afford it anyway. So the moment you compete at a better price point, already you have an advantage. But price is not the only one. Niche is another big one. So let's say a big game comes out at the same time of your release, but your release is in a completely different niche or a genre. Let's say a big racing game comes out and you're releasing an action game. Again, the same argument. If somebody wouldn't be interested in a racing game anyway, then there is intrinsic interest in your action game. So that's another parameter you can use to fight against a bigger release. Another one is stability. So many games nowadays, especially the ones that come out from big game companies out there, are not very stable at the time of the release. Many people report problems. Of course, since so many people play the big games, the problems get highlighted much faster, they get discovered much faster and reported. So that's something that's definitely working against big releases these days. Everybody learns right away that even if a big game just got released, because it has so many bugs and so many issues, it might not be as fun as people anticipate. So that already hurts that game's reputation because of its own actions, essentially. So, that being said, if you can make sure that your game comes out in a better state, then you have a much better fighting chance against the big releases, right? So, you know that you can spend more time testing the game. Maybe your game is simpler or easier or smaller than the big game releases out there. And all these things give you the opportunity to show how much you love the game, show how much passion you pour into the development, make sure it's more stable, has fewer bugs, it's more solid. You pay closer attention to the bug reports during development, and at the time of release, come out with a more solid product, a product that can deliver on its promise, which is much better than a product making a huge promise and under-delivering on it. This would be the thing to avoid. So that's another place where you can fight. Another one is attention to players, right? So if a big game comes out there and has issues, everybody's going to report it, but with the way most big companies think, if a game doesn't perform in the first, let's say, 1 to 3 months, if we want to be generous, Usually it's much shorter than that. But if a game doesn't perform immediately after release, big companies think that this is a huge flop, it was a wasted opportunity, all the budgets that went into the game was wasted, it was a bad idea hiring this bad team, it was a bad idea employing all these people, and they move forward to fire all the developers, cancel the project, can the team, do like extreme steps like that. And then of course they want to work on a big new project and they have to rehire a bunch of people. So what can you say about that? This is just the way many big companies think. And because it is what it is, this is another fighting chance. If in our case, when we're releasing our games, we have the focus to pay closer attention to what people say both before release and during release, and we show that we appreciate the feedback and we do implement it into our game, then we turn essentially all of the would-be complainers about the game into long-term supporters and champions of our game IP. Because they know that the time they put into reporting the errors, making sure that the developers understand where these issues occur and so on, they're very generous with their time and their feedback towards the team. When we reward that by giving back to the fans, to the players of the game, by implementing the changes they request or by addressing the issues they report in the game, that feels hugely rewarding to a player. I know this from a player perspective, from my game playing history. I've seen this happen on every single project I've ever worked on, by specifically and by name referring to players who support the game, who are generous with their time, and they are trying to improve essentially our own game, and not mistaking negative comments for criticism or hate or anything like that, but seeing them for what they truly are, which is a desire for the player to make our game that we developed and they paid money for better. And I cannot think of a better blessing for a game developer than that. So this is something that's, so to speak, smaller game developers or just more passionate game developers can do, that we often see many big studios completely missing and completely ignoring. And finally, the long-term support of a game is something that's very vital, I think. So usually when big games get released, if it's a success, we might see a few patches or an expansion, and usually that's where the support stops. Usually they will try to make as much money as possible by releasing the second title in the series or third title and so on, and try to monetize the audience as aggressively as possible. If we think about it in a different way and we say, after release, player feedback is still going to keep coming in. People are still going to tell us about the errors in the game we can fix, all the issues they discovered, all the things they would like to see in the game in the future. There's surely content that the developers had during development that they couldn't put into the game for whatever reason. Those are great things to include in the game in the long run. Those are very, very valuable things for the developers to do that usually they don't do. Usually when a game doesn't do well in the release, people quit, which I think is a huge, huge shame, because this is a golden opportunity here. When somebody plays a game, and I've seen this from my experience, and to everybody I've spoken about this throughout my career, this is a resounding yes. So everybody else has had the same experience. When we see a game still being worked on in the months and years after its initial release, definitely the players who love the game will keep playing it because they know this is an active project, so to speak. It's not a dead, abandoned, never to be looked at again game project. So when we keep playing the game and we see fixes every other week and these fixes affect us, and the additional content seems to be what we want to see and it's not going in a completely different direction, that is all working to make the players who already like the game want to play it more. And when that core of players is satisfied with the game and they feel that they're part of the game, their contribution as feedback is helping the game grow, it's no longer a game that's out there. It's their game. It's something that they're the community of, and they're developing or helping to develop the game together with the developers. And people who are having this experience, so players who are having this experience when playing a game, are absolutely very likely to recommend the game to their friends. And as we mentioned before in in this podcast, a recommendation from a friend for playing a game is more powerful than any trailer, any advertisement, any clever marketing trick, campaign, scheme, whatever. Even if it's the worst game in the world, if your friend says, "Hey, on Saturday, let's play this together," even if it's just to have fun and just to laugh, that recommendation is hands down the most powerful, I suppose you could say, marketing trick or something to help the game spread in the known universe, basically. So going after your players in that sense, so trying to delight them for as long as possible in the best way possible, is something we typically don't see from very, very large game releases. And this is another place where we can fight against them, and we have actually the advantage in. So that being said, I also want to, as a bonus here, I want to talk about a couple of myths that exist around the age-old pricing debate around games, and this idea that everybody wants to go for the Christmas season, everybody wants to get the holiday money of all the players, and once you buy one game, you'll never buy another game ever again, and all that stuff. So let's be specific. The first thing I want to talk about is that, well, let's say that a big game comes out this month. Players who buy it will never buy anything else. This seems to be the understanding of people, and yes, it's definitely true for some people, but it's just a margin of the market. Let's say you like a certain type of game. Let's say it's racing games. Just because one big racing game came out this month, or two of them, that doesn't mean that you wouldn't buy both, or that you wouldn't be interested in buying both, right? So let's say you really, really don't have the money to buy both games this month. That's fine. Many people buy them in the next month, or 2 months later, or 3 months later. Just because a game released 2 months ago doesn't mean it's bad, or 6 months ago for that matter. If you really want to play your next favorite genre's game, the game is still there. And if it's doing all the things we talked about already, so if the price makes sense, if you see that it has attention to the player feedback, it has a long-term support and so on, then those are all more reasons for a player to be interested in that game. And just because they bought a game previously, that doesn't mean that they will never buy a game ever again in this universe. This is just an unrealistic claim. So the other one I want to talk about is the price point, right? So what is expensive and what is cheap and so on. Yes, I get it that maybe $100 is too much for a game, but at the same time, you have to think about what players, or people for that matter, actually spend money on. So $100 might be too much for a game, but many people go out drinking, partying, purchasing clothes or shoes or accessories and gadgets and whatever it is, go on holidays, spending way, way more than $100. So looking from a purely factual point of view, a lot more money was spent on other activities than games for certain people. So you might have heard of the expression that we vote with our wallets. And I think it's very true. So if, let's say, one person thinks that $100 is too much for a game, but $200 is an okay price for a good pair of shoes, for example, then that simply shows that that person appreciates shoes more than games for a dollar to dollar comparison. And that's different for every person out there. Um, Conversely, there's people who really love one game, and even if that game has hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars worth of game content, DLCs, skins, additional weapons, whatever you want to call it, subscription, um, because they're enjoying the game so much, they're happy to pay, let's say, a $10 subscription for 5 years, and that's way more than $50 or $100 uh, that a game would cost, supposedly. So something needs to be said about the importance people put in their game hobbies or how much enjoyment they extract out of it and how that affects their relation to price. So if someone says, for example, that, oh my God, $20 is too much for a game, it's too expensive. And then they go and spend it on, I don't know, some weird gadget from the internet that they're never even going to use, then that shows a relative relationship to the price rather than something strict that should be taken as gospel. So if someone says $20 is too much for a game, but they go and buy a $50 gadget that they use for 5 seconds and then never again, then that doesn't mean that $20 is too much for any game anywhere ever. It just means that for that person, it has less value than the gadget that they ended up buying. And as we said, there's people who enjoy a certain game so much that they don't mind spending hundreds or thousands of dollars on the game because they feel that they're getting the value out of it. So to wrap it all up, I think the main points here to consider is that if indeed an objectively better game is coming out at the same time as your game, or it's still around by the time your game releases, and it's simply better. It's got better graphics, more budget, more people worked on it for longer, and so on. It would be unrealistic to expect that everybody out there would not buy that clearly superior game, and they would buy the game that we developed with less resources instead. That is a very important distinction to make in our mind, I think. And then, even if we're talking about fighting against large games like that, we can still always fight on things like price or stability or showing just love towards our games, if we're talking about smaller or bigger, I guess, developers, and show how our games are different. They're just made different and maintained different than many of the bigger company releases that are clearly just a business transaction and nothing more. And finally, there's always complaints about price in games, but no matter how many complaints there are out there, the behavior that people actually display in their lives tells a different story about priorities and what they enjoy, right? So if let's say there was a game out there that costs $500, but it's the best in its type, or it offers something no other game out there offers, then many people would think, well, yeah, it has a crazy high price tag because it has a crazy high value proposition to the people it does. So hopefully this provides some context for you, traveler, to think about these things and be better prepared to have that release in that environment, and have a few tricks up your sleeve for how you can fight against these giant behemoths out there. One thing that I found in my career that I would definitely like to mention to you is that the mindset that says, oh, we could never fight against that game because it's got better this and that, that mindset is generally not helpful. Any excuse for staying off your track and going away from your development and giving up the fight is generally not helpful. It will lead you in a direction that will not be beneficial in the long or short term. Instead, seeing the situation out there and seeing it as an opportunity to succeed is a mindset that definitely helps. So knowing you cannot compete against other games on ABC variables, but you can compete against them in DEF variables, then that is a mindset worth investing in. And that is a fight worth having. And when you do have that fight, you will win. Anyway, I hope this helps provide some context for people out there. I hope that it is a way to show you that this is not just an excuse to quit, but this is a reason to keep putting your love and your time and your devotion to your project. Because when you do so, just the rewards will absolutely and unmistakably compound over time. Anyway, I hope at least this helps even one person out there. Thank you so much for your time. And as always, have fun.